So in this video I want to explain why you should pull the trigger really, let's say, fast and not in a really slow, like you want to try to hit a wall and things like that. Because with the Airsoft edition the springs are so soft that you don't really notice that anyways. And the risk that you are getting, what will happen is, if you do it really slow and let the hammer break free, then the trigger is still not really removed. You can see, hopefully with me painting it, that you can see that the trigger can still touch the hammer then that way. And because the hammer spring is really weak, it will slow the hammer down. So I've noticed with my testing, when I'm doing test fire, I have to aim through a chronograph, look at the target, look at what the reading is saying on the chronograph. I kind of get distracted, and sometimes I notice unconsciously when I'm kind of unsure if it's going to work, I pull my trigger really slow, and then I will get bad results because that are unnecessary, because I let the hammer drag on the trigger. And that's something that I wanted to show, that if you do it really fast, you have more tendency to pull the trigger away from the hammer, so it got more momentum to do its work. Yet the spring is still weak enough so the bolt can push it back and it can reset again. And of course, this is just the hammer and the trigger. There's no semi-disconnect in this example, because I just wanted to focus on these two parts. So in a way it does make sense to grease, of course, this part on the hammer, so it kind of, in case you do have it that it touches the trigger still, it kind of slides. So that is something that does help, I guess, if you want to go that route. Something that I did came to mind, like increasing the size of the contact points on the trigger and the hammer does of course also increase the friction. Then you have this issue that it drags on the trigger. But I do think it's worth it, because it's a bit stronger, that you got more contact points. I mean, the good thing about it is that there is less spring tension, so there is less pressure pressing against that part. But still, if the trigger gets a little bit hot, then it's got more heat transfer in more material, so it does not warp that fast, things like that. This should be in theory better to do it this way. But yeah, that was something that I do want to point out, because it isn't really a thing that I noticed with my testing. Every time I kind of thinking like, oh, I'm not sure if it's going to let's say cycle too much or not cycle, then I sometimes are really slow in my trigger pull, and then I make it worse. It will also, you have to imagine, it may cause the replica to not cycle correctly, but it of course will also give you inconsistency. If you most of the time let the hammer drop freely by just properly pull the trigger back, then of course you get a different FPS than when you are letting it slide on the trigger. Also, a thing that's worth to point out, and that's also why there are two trigger designs with the safety. In regards to the safety, if you have the 3D printed safety, it got a little bit of a different height in relation to how it will interact with the trigger. I've noticed with another sample of, let's say, the trigger group model example, that the safety is a little bit different from the one that's originally with the FGC-6 and the 9. It's a little bit lower than it should be on when it's on spec, let's say. So that's why the ones that I could buy in the past from AliExpress were a little bit different, and prevented you, that's an important point, you from pulling the trigger all the way up. So in case you do have a safety that you want to use, and still with the two options you don't get it to clear, let's say, the hammer, then you may want to take the trigger out and maybe sand it a little bit down this corner right here. We'll show it in a moment. So you can clear the hammer so it can rub freely. If you really feel that it is really rubbing or it is really hard to let it release and that it is just barely releasing, then you want to take a look at this part right here and make sure that you can do this. You can make this complete motion, or at least better than just barely releasing the hammer. Do keep in mind, if you do remove something right here, then you will have, when you have it on safe, that you can pull the trigger a little bit. You can move the trigger a little bit, even that it's on safe, but it should not be enough, otherwise it's not safe to, of course, do it all the way and release the hammer. That's something that you then need to check. But it is worth kind of looking into. So you have a hammer that's usually just moving freely without any energy taking away from the trigger. That's all I want to kind of say. Hope it's clear, and I hope that kind of helps also some people with some issues they may not notice that they unconsciously are doing, and maybe then you notice like, oh yeah, that time I was kind of pulling it really halfway or really slow. And that's why it was not cycling, and most of the time it does work. So yeah, I think that's worth to point out. So this applies to all the hammer fight models, of course, so not for the FA. And as you can see, I've used here 4mm bolts in case you really have trouble finding, let's say, the AR-15 trigger pins and hammer pin. You may want to use this. It works. I mean, it looks a little bit, yeah, not professional, let's say. But you can use it in case you don't want to, and you find it a little bit hard to use the metal rod that I suggest that you use. So it is another option. I'm not saying it's better, but you can use it. That's what I kind of want to point out. I just take this because it was kind of easy to do for now. So this part of the trigger, that's where will interact with the safety. So in case it's too much, just take it on a flat table with sandpaper and just take a little bit off of there, and then try it again and check, of course, that even when it's unsafe, it does not want to release the hammer. Of course, then also check if it now is enough to fully clear the hammer when it wants to fly forward. So that's it, and see you guys next time.